Okay, I can see people rapidly running out of the room to get away from an ESG conversation. I won't take it personally. Just to introduce myself, my name's Adam Creemore. I'm a senior manager in the ESG advisory team at KPMG. I look after kind of ESG within our firm, covering ESG transformation reporting and assurance. Today, we're going to be talking about ESG programs within businesses. I think just before we kind of start the session, it's worth remembering that ESG is more than just kind of carbon footprint. We're looking at issues across business, ranging from how we look at problems that arise. That's the governance heading for us. Diversity and inclusion, charitable giving, a whole range of social topics, as well as carbon footprint, environment, biodiversity, that are kind of the ones that people might jump to when they think about ESG. I'll be asking the guys a few questions on ESG specifically, with a bit of time for Q&A at the end, but appreciate lunch is coming up. So if you do have questions, please do shout, but I know some people will be running for some food. But joined today by Sarah Campbell, who is a Director of Compliance at Microgaming, Steve Hull from the Climate Change team, Business Climate Change Partner for the Isle of Man Government, Ela Hughes, CFO at Manx Telecom, and Ty Smith, Head of ESG at Games Global. So if we start with governance, try not to drop this iPad. Governance is a topic that a lot of businesses tend to think is kind of often already covered, or if they're a small business, think it's not too important. But it's really foundational to sustainable businesses. I think that's what we kind of covered when we had a bit of a pre-chat the other day. If we can start with Ty, but I'll sort of open it up to the whole panel. What approach have you taken to building your governance structures in general, and also around ESG specifically?
Yeah, no problem at all. So we were, for those of you that don't know, Games Global is pretty much gone from a stall to multinational global company in the space of probably like 18 months. So it's been a unique ride. And when we were working on the corporate governance frameworks, one of the things we looked at was saying, okay, this was our opportunity to really build it in from scratch. So I would say if the focus of this session is around what are actions that businesses can take, it's about empowering, right? What can you do to have this not happen around you, but to actively steer it. And I think one of the biggest bang for buck items we decided early doors was to build in ESG into our governance frameworks. And by that, what I mean is at the very, very highest level in the organization, setting up the ESG committee at board level to make sure that conversation is happening and happening on a frequent basis. What we've seen, some CSR programs, what you'll see is they will, there'll be the flavor of the month for that month or week, whatever it may be, and then they fall back off the agenda. I think making sure that at your board level, you have that independent committee that are there consistently asking the question and advising the board as to whether you are doing enough, that keeps the conversation on the table and it keeps it happening. So that's probably the biggest single action I think we've taken in terms of that commitment.
Ela, maybe some thoughts from Manx Telecom as sort of a listed business previously, how you guys have dealt with it?
Yeah, for governance for MT, I suppose we're slightly lucky. It's very different than what you're saying, Ty. So it's a business that's been around for 100 years, but the big difference in our business is the fact that we were an ex-listed PLC on the London stock market. So because of that, there was practically an obsession. We would have had policies, governance over everything. So it's really, really ingrained into our business. So we've kept that going, obviously, as we went into private ownership over the last number of years. What's happened, I suppose, over the last 4 or 5 years, but certainly post-COVID, is there's been a pendulum shift. Number one, an obsession with ESG, which is brilliant and hugely important, especially on the energy side for us owning data centres. But also from a travel perspective, working from home, teams, what we're trying to drive in terms of culturals. Is it to get people in the office all the time? Are we comfortable with people working from home? So that's really changed things. What we've noticed as well, we would have a number of offices in the UK, in London and Manchester, and we've had to take very different approaches really on what we're trying to drive culturally within some of those business units. So in the UK, it's a lot more difficult in terms of getting into cities, people living hundreds of miles away. So it's driven a real working from home methodology. But we're still trying to get that collaboration and getting people into the office. In the Isle of Man, it's slightly different. Again, everyone has very different views on this, but we love having people in the office. We love the collaboration that drives. So we've taken a slightly different view in the Isle of Man from that perspective.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ela. If we talk a little bit about the social side of things, we've talked about sort of formalizing CSR initiatives. Ty mentioned, where companies have that sort of historical, but also if you're bringing it in new, that's a very different structure you might look at. How do you ensure that what you do socially is impactful and has a positive benefit for the island directly? Steve, maybe if we start with you on some of what government is doing to support in that area.
Yeah. So sort of on the social side of things, I mean, obviously there's the legal framework in terms of Human Rights and Equality Act as well, and there's codes of practice around employment. So, I mean, from a government point of view, it's extremely important for our economy that we have a diverse and inclusive approach within businesses, obviously to sort of maximise the workforce. Obviously, with regards to assistance to businesses, I mean, many of you will have seen the table outside in terms of the enterprise support. So there's support there available for particularly sort of startups on the financial assistance side, and there's other schemes. So certainly, if you're not familiar with those, I would make yourself aware. In terms of obviously businesses themselves recognise that engagement with the community is absolutely critical. And one of the things that we're looking at the moment within government is how we attract on the finance side, how we attract more finance and support into projects on the islands, particularly nature-based. But that's not just about carbon sequestration or biodiversity gain, but also looking at community engagement as well. And that's something we've got a number of options that we're looking at and looking to take forward. So it's, critically important.
Thanks, Steve. Sarah, maybe if we can come to you. I mean, microgaming's had a sort of famously strong CSR, history going back years. It'd be useful to understand from your business perspective how you guys measure the impact that you have as a business with sort of such a strong program over a number of years.
Yeah, absolutely. Microgaming has been well established on the island for a long time now, and our Play It Forward CSR program is very strong. As a business, it's something we're incredibly proud of and our people are very passionate about. We've evolved it over a number of years to keep in line with our business values, which is very important, and obviously coming now into more of an ESG framework. We're at kind of the opposite scale to Ty there, where we have to kind of look at how we bring that into a more measurable existence. So I think key from our perspective is we've always focused very much on building quality relationships with the charities and the institutions that we work with, and engagement with our staff is absolutely critical. We have a wonderful bank of volunteers who've done everything from marshalling to painting puffins for the calf. So it's not all about just those monetary donations, it's the other aspects that are incredibly important. The interesting aspect, I think, around the social element is that, the monitoring and recording of return on social investment is actually quite difficult. So as we evolve from more of a CSR environment into that framework, it's something that we are very conscious about. It's something that we are continuing to work on.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. A question that's coming on Slido as we've gone along, maybe for Ty and Sarah, if this one's one for you. How do you look at something like ESG in an industry like gaming, where there are sort of some very specific and quite challenging ESG topics like responsible gaming or something like that? Ty, maybe if we come to you first, if you're happy to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's about if we take the whole principle of ESG and it often gets misunderstood, it's just about sustainability, right? That's it. Fundamentally, it's just about sustainability, and I think every single person in the room, given the choice between a sustainable business and a non-sustainable business, would go, yeah, we'll clearly choose a sustainable route, right? So I think if you apply that to our industry and specifically to our businesses, right? So we're a software provider that provides games that we're incredibly proud of and we think are fantastic into the online gaming industry, which is an adult entertainment industry. So you don't have to think very far before sustainability becomes quite a relevant conversation in what you do. Now we have to be really quite pragmatic in what we can and can't do, because we don't have access to the actual player themselves. So for anyone who doesn't really know, the way it works is the operator offers our games to the industry. They have oversight of the player. We as the game supplier don't have that oversight. However, what we can do is help them, right? And that's how this should work. So it should be about a collaboration, and that's what it means to us. So firstly, our products, and then secondly, how can we make sure that we work with our customers, who are the operators, to give them the information they need. So one good example of that may be, don't be surprised if internally we get a request from one of our customers saying, could we have play data on a specific game for an extended period? And we go, okay, well, we don't have to think very hard to establish what that might be about, right? Okay, so yeah, that's one example, I think, of how we can look at it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ty. Sarah, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to really second what Ty said there, it's about creating a sustainable business, as he says. So if we weren't taking the responsibility with regards to safer gambling on board as well, we almost kind of look at it separately from the main ESG when you're looking at the kind of working environment. We're all very conscious of that. So when I mentioned before about working with quality relationships with charities, for example, and just being very conscious about where you're putting your donations or where you're putting your assistance, and ensuring that the product that you are actually delivering is sustainable and responsible as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. If we move on to the topic of environment, Jason was talking about collaboration earlier. On the environment, obviously, the government has its plans around renewable energy in the not too distant future. But we've also seen a number of private companies kind of doing their own thing, be it solar panels or whatever it might be. Obviously, in that sort of sense of collaboration, there's a lot of things that businesses can do to work together to reduce their carbon footprints, working with suppliers, working with their clients. What do you see as being a real key sort of value driver for your business in pursuing environmental improvements? And how do you go about this while you're waiting for those sort of really big scale infrastructure changes that may come to the island? Ela, maybe if we start with you from Manx Telecom's perspective.
Yeah, so this is huge for us. So this is probably one of our, along with fibre on the Isle of Man, this is our biggest topic, our biggest challenge. So I'm not exaggerating to say our data centres and our data centre business would probably cease to exist, I'm saying, in 5 or 10 years' time without access to renewable energy, because we will not be able to win any business. It's as black and white as that. So we've seen it over the last few years. We're lucky some of our business have been very successful in the UK. Synapse in particular, which is led by a guy called Steve Douglas, who's just smiling in the background, has been super successful in winning business. Okay, so we've won universities in the UK, York University, London, Luton Airport, a number of very large law firms we're servicing through the Isle of Man, through 400 people that are based in the Isle of Man, and we're winning multiple business in the UK public and private sector. So we're super proud of it. The challenge we have is that we have been no bidding on contracts, because the question that keeps coming up is, are you carbon zero? What's your 100% renewable plan? And unfortunately, it's been a challenge, okay? The great news, and credit to the MUA and credit to government, okay, because it's awful easy to throw stones, is they have listened to us and they've assisted us with getting green energy via the UK Interconnect, which has been backdated to April 1, which is fully certified. Okay, so that's a game changer for us. So where we were, okay, we've got a major problem over the last number of months, credit to MUA, DFE, government, etc. They've managed to overcome that issue by bringing in renewable energy. Okay, so again, it means we can continue to grow. We can continue to bring people back to the Isle of Man through those businesses that are growing offshore. So it's a great story. It's win-win for everybody. The next step for us is, okay, great, we're getting renewable energy, but it could be better. We could have it on island. We could have wind farms, large-scale solar systems, etc. And that's where we want to go to. So we have Manx Group, again, has been successful. The good news is, because of that success, we have got money that we can invest into the island. Millions. We are doing it at the moment with our data centre. Over the next 3 years, I think we're probably going to put 4 million into our data centre to upgrade PUE systems, battery systems, basically to bring up the energy efficiency from an ESG standpoint. But we would love the opportunity in terms of self-sustaining wind farms, large-scale solar rollouts, etc. but we know there's a lot of work still to happen from an infrastructure standpoint within the MUA to create the ability to get that power back into the grid. So I think we're a little bit off that yet, but that is where our objective sits.
Cheers, Ela. I'll give my microphone to Steve to let him give sort of government's perspective on that.
Yeah, so as Ela says, government has been listening to businesses. I mean, it's not something that can change overnight in terms of infrastructure, but there have been changes made. One thing I would point people to, and particularly around the amount of information that's coming out around renewables and and wind energy specifically, is the DEFRA energy policy, which came out in June of this year. It's a really, really good document. It doesn't just highlight the strategies, but it actually sets out the principles underpinning those as well. And it really gives an insight in terms of the direction that we're going in. But another important feature within that document, which is recognised, is the fact that that policy is going to be reviewed on an annual basis, and that's specifically facilitating input from the private sector, from businesses. So the sort of challenges that have been spoken about there. One of the complexities is it's not just a case of the finance, but it's also in terms of a market for the energy that's produced. So that's another complexity within the picture as well. One final thing I'd say on this, in terms of my role, I am a climate change partner, so I am meeting with businesses. So I'm that link between businesses and government in that respect, can link up with specialists within. And it's really around ESG, so it's wider than just the climate change side of things. So when I'm talking to businesses, I'm hearing about some of these challenges. They are being fed back into government, so it's another route really to get those concerns in and listened to, and we can think about solutions.
Just one other to add, if you don't mind as well, is we recently completed a relatively large finance agreement with a number of banks, Lloyds being one, Lloyds on the Isle of Man, mainly to fund and to finance the rollout of fibre that's going on over the island. But the reason I mentioned that on ESG is, as everybody knows, there's a big push now in sustainable finance. So if you can prove that you're calculating your emissions, you're tracking on a downward trend, and you've got initiatives in place, there is material discounts that you're getting to interest rates at the moment. So again, it's another driver or reason to really push on that ESG agenda, because it can not just save you money in terms of being self-sustaining yourself, but from an interest and a financing perspective, it can be very material.
Sorry, it was just to add a point in there. Like, if we come back to what this session's about empowering ESG journeys, I think there's a bit that's alluded to in there, and I just want to sort of make sure it's clearly understood. So what Erla's talking about there in terms of the procurement processes, I think there's a potential misconception that's going on at the moment. Say, okay, well, I don't have to report necessarily directly under any specific framework or to any specific rules, and I think this is a perfect example of it. That's at the outset when you're trying to go in and get that piece of business. For a business like ours, we have customers all over the world who, whilst we might not necessarily have to report under a specific framework, so CSRD and the ESRS requirements, or the SEC requirements in the US, if you're a listed company out there, even if you don't have to do that, the likelihood is your customers, if they're of any size, probably are going to have to do that. So even if you don't have this stuff built in place because you don't have to directly report, your customers are going to come knocking on your door and they're going to say, okay, can we have information about your supply chain? Can we have information about your carbon emissions? And this is a proper ghost of Christmas future moment here now, where you go, you've got an opportunity to get ahead of the curve, and that by definition is empowering people on their ESG journeys, right? Like, get ahead of it now, build that all in.
Brilliant, thanks, Ty. I've got a fair few questions that have come in through Slido, so if we work through a couple of those now. One of the questions here, in a time where greenwashing is a major concern for businesses, or just sustainability washing in general, how can companies really, genuinely commit to ESG without just turning it into a money pit? How should they be held accountable? Maybe a question for Stephen. There's a follow-up question here asking where Ty gets his shoes from, as they are lush.
I won't comment on your shoes. I mean, in terms of greenwashing, yeah, I mean, it's a really important aspect. Mark mentioned in the previous discussion about Sustainable Finance Initiative, one of the aspects of that will be a taxonomy. So that's really looking to define what is meant by the various terminology that businesses put out. So that will certainly be a feature of that. Within that sustainable finance piece, we're looking at a cross-departmental working, so that involves the regulator as well. So potentially, there may be accreditation, but also it's looking at some of the regulation around that side of things as well. So,
maybe one for Ty or Sarah, but recently, Malta have put out a proposal around ESG disclosures in the gaming sector. It's an optional disclosure set, but it's quite an interesting step there, and obviously a fairly comparable jurisdiction to ours. Do you guys have any thoughts on that sort of government provided accountability? Sort of an interesting development.
Yeah, and it is an interesting one. It's the first time that we've seen an actual regulator roll out. As you said, it's a voluntary code at the moment, but the wording around it is that they will strongly advise their licence holders to participate and report. And I think it's key kind of to what Ty was saying earlier about the misconception around reporting in general. Everybody across the board, I think, will have some kind of touch point on this at some time, whether it's through the whole supply chain, whether it's the changes we're now seeing in a regulatory environment, whatever, customer accountability, etc. So it's important for everyone to get on board. And coming back to the point about the costings, etc., on the previous question, start small. Most of us will have some form of CSR program in place. Ours is quite large, granted. Others will be smaller, but you'll be surprised when you actually go back and look at some of the framework information and actually look at what you're doing. You will already be meeting a lot of requirements in some form, and it may well be that you just need to bring in some kind of measurement metrics or formal framework around it. But don't become overwhelmed initially looking at everything. Take it in baby steps, start small and move from there.
Yeah. I think from the MGA's perspective, it's interesting. This was a conversation we had at EGSAB a couple of months ago back, I think. And I love it. I love the fact that they're recognising there's an opportunity to lead. It's like the old, for those of you that don't know, I was best part of a decade with Mr. Brennan. I see him over there at the Gambling Supervision Commission. And that's what the GSC was all about. It was about thought leadership, right? It was about understanding your role in the world and punching above your weight. And I think what the MGA have realised is, and it's the oldest trick in the book from a regulatory perspective, is put something in that's voluntary, get everyone to sign up to it. It becomes established as best practice. Then, as a regulator, you're there to enforce best practice, right? So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. What it does do is it gives them a competitive place in the market, and it gives them an opportunity to not only improve their framework in a longer term, but it also sends out a very clear tone. Now, the MGA aren't just doing this in isolation. This is part of a bigger piece of work down in Malta for them to have a really, really strong position from as a sort of a strong ESG jurisdiction. And I think Jason's session earlier that's what I love about that, right? Is it's a very, very clear position. And I think there was a point that was mentioned in the previous panel, which was around leading from the front. And I think that's really, really important, right? Like, it's really important that government steps up and says, as strong position as an island, as a jurisdiction, this is what we're about. And I think that's what you are seeing in Malta. I think that's what we'll continue to see down there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ty. I can see a question that's rapidly accumulating thumbs up on my screen here. I can see some angry red numbers telling me we're low on time. But can the panel give a little bit of insight on specifically how you're addressing gender parity or sort of other D&I parity issues?
Yeah. From our side, it's probably one of the hardest industries is tech engineering in terms of getting diversity. It's something that we have pushed a lot, even above the line, through STEM processes, through grad chairs, etc., to try and get that balance right. And I feel we are making good inroads into areas that historically have been extremely challenging. And I think we're seeing that across our fibre teams as well, you may see. For us, it's a lot of it is tracking as well, and it goes back to the governance and putting pressure on companies internally by getting those reporting tables external on what we're doing. But yeah, look, it again, to repeat, it's challenging in certain industries because especially when it's from an engineering standpoint, it's just historically hasn't happened. So we're just got to keep focus, and trying to get the message out there. But I do feel we're making inroads on our side, yeah.
I think it's one of those things. I mean, I'm going to go for the ESG card bingo house here in a minute. Someone will call it, because we haven't had it yet, which is the whole notion of what matters gets measured, right? And it is that point, and it's exactly what I was talking about there. Even if you're not going to go external with that, and you don't, if you're a private company, you don't need to go external with your sustainability reports. You absolutely don't. But if it matters within your organization, then measure it and talk about it and have those conversations. As a business, we're really quite fortunate because we have good people in good positions making good decisions that are aware of gender bias and aware of cognitive diversity and all of those things that fall under that social remit. But yeah, measure it, talk about it, make sure you're reporting on it, even if it's only internally. That's how you can start.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ty. I can feel sort of a metaphorical shepherd's crook about to yank us off stage. So thanks very much to the panel for coming up and giving us a great session on a few thoughts on ESG. I believe it's the lunch break now, so feel free to collar me or hopefully any of the other guys if you have any other sort of follow-up questions. I know there are a few we didn't get to, but thanks everyone.